I gave her everything, worked myself to the bone, maxed out every credit card, went into debt I'm still paying off, built a life from nothing while she sat on the couch complaining it wasn't good enough. Then she left, said she'd met someone else, someone who made her feel alive. I begged her to stay. She laughed, walked out with her suitcase and her dignity, leaving me with empty rooms and emptier bank accounts. 6 months later, she called me crying. Bruised face, broken ribs. The man she'd chosen beat her within an inch of her life. She wanted to come back, wanted me to save her. And I had to make the hardest choice of my life. The humidity hung thick over Atlanta that August evening in 2018, the kind that made your shirt stick to your back even after the sun went down. Marcus Hayes wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped off the MARTA train at 5 Point Station, his work boots heavy with the exhaustion of another 12-hour shift at the construction site in Buckhead. At 42 years old, his body had started keeping score of every extra hour, every doubled shift, every weekend he'd traded for overtime pay. But it was worth it. Everything was worth it for Vanessa. They'd met 2 years earlier at a friend's barbecue in East Atlanta. She'd been wearing a yellow sundress that caught the late afternoon light, her laugh cutting through the noise of drunk conversations and competing Bluetooth speakers. Marcus had never considered himself smooth with women. His ex-wife had made that clear enough during their divorce 5 years prior. But something about Vanessa's smile made him forget his usual awkwardness. They'd talked for 3 hours straight, sitting on the back porch steps while mosquitoes buzzed around them and the smell of charcoal and ribs filled the air. She worked at a call center in Midtown, lived with 2 roommates in a cramped apartment off Ponce de Leon Avenue, and talked about dreams bigger than her current reality. She wanted a real home. Stability. Someone who would treat her right. Marcus, who'd spent the last 5 years healing from his own broken marriage, saw in Vanessa a chance to do things differently this time. A chance to be the man he'd failed to be before. 6 months into dating, he'd suggested they move in together. His 1-bedroom apartment in College Park wasn't much, a second-floor walk-up in a complex that had seen better days, but it was his, and he wanted to share it. More than that, he wanted to build something with her. "Are you sure?" Vanessa had asked, her dark eyes searching his face for doubt. "I mean, I don't have much to bring. My roommates own most of the furniture." "We'll figure it out," Marcus had said, taking her hands in his. "We'll build it together, one piece at a time." That promise had felt sacred then, noble even. Now, walking up the concrete stairs to their apartment, his knees aching and his wallet lighter than it had been in years, Marcus wondered when together had become alone. The apartment door was unlocked. He pushed it open to find Vanessa on the couch, the gray sectional he'd bought on a payment plan from Rooms to Go, the one she'd insisted on even though the cheaper option would have kept him out of debt. She was scrolling through her phone, her face lit by the blue glow of the screen, her expression blank. "Hey, baby," Marcus said, setting his lunch cooler by the door. "How was your day?" She didn't look up. "Fine." The living room still smelled new, that particular scent of fresh furniture and carpet cleaner. Marcus had spent the last 18 months furnishing this place. First the stove, a basic electric model from Home Depot that did the job. Then the refrigerator, a scratch and dent special he'd found on sale. The sectional had come next, followed by the bed, a 55-inch Samsung TV that Vanessa had wanted for Netflix binges, a dining table set, and just last month, a washer and dryer unit because Vanessa had complained about going to the laundromat. Each purchase had required careful calculation, credit card juggling, and extra shifts. His Discover card was maxed. His Capital One was close. He'd taken out a personal loan from his credit union to cover the washer and dryer, telling himself it was an investment in their future. But standing there now, watching Vanessa scroll mindlessly while he stood covered in drywall dust and concrete grit, that future felt less certain. "You eat yet?" he asked, heading toward the kitchen. "No." He waited for her to elaborate, to ask what he wanted for dinner, to maybe offer to help. Instead, she laughed at something on her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen as she typed a response to someone. Marcus opened the refrigerator, the one he'd bought, and found it mostly empty. A half-gallon of milk. Some leftover Chinese takeout from 3 days ago, a case of Diet Coke. Nothing that resembled the makings of an actual meal. He closed the fridge and turned to find Vanessa still on her phone. Van, we talked about this. If you're home before me, maybe you could… Could what? She finally looked up, her expression sharp. I work too, Marcus. I'm tired too. I know, baby. I'm just saying, if we're both working, maybe we could split some of the house stuff. I didn't ask you to work all those extra hours. She returned her attention to her phone. That's your choice. The words landed like a slap. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been developing hairline fractures for months now. He'd been the one who cleaned the apartment every weekend, the one who did the laundry, washed the dishes, took out the trash, vacuumed the carpets. Vanessa contributed nothing to the household maintenance, claiming exhaustion from her 8-hour shifts at a job where she sat at a desk all day. But it wasn't just the housework. It was the growing distance, the way she'd become a stranger sharing his space. The way she'd started coming home later, offering vague explanations. The way she'd changed her phone password and angled the screen away from him when he walked by. Marcus had ignored the signs because acknowledging them meant confronting a truth he wasn't ready to face. He was losing her, if he'd ever really had her at all. I'm gonna take a shower, he said quietly. Vanessa didn't respond. Under the hot water, the water heater he'd had installed last spring, Marcus let his forehead rest against the tile. He thought about his marriage to Keisha, how it had fallen apart because he'd worked too much, been too absent, too focused on providing instead of being present. He'd promised himself he'd do better with Vanessa, be more attentive, more available. But what did availability matter when the other person had already checked out? He dried off with one of the towels from the set Vanessa had insisted they buy from Bed Bath & Beyond, the expensive Egyptian cotton ones that had cost nearly $200. Wrapped in that overpriced towel, Marcus looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. When had he become so tired? When had the lines around his eyes gotten so deep? When had he started accepting being treated like he was invisible in his own home? He found leftover pizza in the freezer and heated it in the microwave, eating standing up in the kitchen while Vanessa remained on the couch, still absorbed in her phone. The artificial cheese tasted like cardboard, but Marcus barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, running calculations he'd been avoiding for months. He was $3,800 in credit card debt. Another $5,000 on the personal loan. His savings account, which had once held a modest emergency fund, was down to $400. He was 2 months behind on his car payment for the 2012 Toyota Camry he needed to get to work sites across the metro area. All of it, every dollar, every sacrifice, every extra shift, had been for this. For her. For them. But there was no them anymore. Was there? There was just Marcus, exhausting himself to maintain a life that Vanessa seemed to tolerate rather than appreciate. That night, lying in bed, the king-size mattress set he'd bought from Mattress Firm on a zero-interest payment plan, Marcus stared at the ceiling and listened to Vanessa breathe beside him. She'd come to bed without a word, without a kiss, without even acknowledging his presence. He wanted to reach for her, to bridge the growing chasm between them with touch, with words, with anything that might remind them both of what they'd once been. But he didn't. Because somewhere deep in his gut, Marcus knew the truth he'd been running from for months. Vanessa was already gone. She was just waiting for the right moment to leave. And when that moment came, Marcus Hayes, who had sacrificed everything, who had built this life from nothing, who had loved her with every piece of himself, would be left alone with the debt, the furniture, and the devastating realization that love, no matter how genuine, cannot force someone to stay. September brought cooler temperatures to Atlanta, but the chill in Marcus's apartment had nothing to do with the weather. Vanessa had become a ghost, physically present but emotionally absent, drifting through their shared space like she was counting down to something Marcus couldn't see. He'd started noticing the details, the way she'd taken extra care with her makeup on random Tuesdays, the new perfume she'd bought, something expensive that she definitely hadn't asked him to pay for. The way she'd smile at her phone, a softness in her expression that never appeared when she looked at him anymore. Marcus tried to convince himself he was being paranoid, that his insecurity was creating problems where none existed. But the evidence kept mounting like unpaid bills. It was a Thursday evening when things came to a head. Marcus had gotten off work early for once, a rare gift when a shipment of materials was delayed at the Buckhead site. He'd stopped by the Publix on Old National Highway and picked up ingredients for dinner, thinking maybe a home-cooked meal might remind Vanessa of better times. He was chopping onions for spaghetti sauce when she walked through the door at 7:30, a full hour and a half later than her usual time. "Where you been?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his tone light. Vanessa kicked off her heels and dropped her purse on the dining table. "Had to work late, big project deadline." "On a Thursday?" "Yeah, Marcus. On a Thursday." Her voice carried an edge that could cut glass. "Since when do I have to explain my schedule to you?" "I'm not saying you do, I'm just—" He set down the knife, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Van, can we talk? Really talk?" She sighed, the kind of long-suffering exhale that suggested his very existence exhausted her. "About what?" "About us. About what's going on here." He gestured around the apartment at the life he'd built for them. "It feels like you're not even here anymore, like you're just waiting for something." For a moment, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or recognition that she'd been caught. But it vanished quickly, replaced by defensive anger. "You know what your problem is, Marcus. You're always trying to control everything, always questioning me, always making me feel like I owe you something. I don't think you owe me anything. I just want to understand what happened to us." "Nothing happened. You happened." She crossed her arms, her stance challenging. "You and your constant working, your constant tiredness, your constant need for me to be grateful for every little thing you do." The accusation hit him like a physical blow. "I never asked you to be grateful. I just wanted us to build something together. That's what you said you wanted. Maybe I changed my mind." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with finality. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs, his mouth dry. "What does that mean?" Vanessa looked away, toward the window where the Atlanta skyline glittered in the distance. "It means I'm tired, Marcus. I'm tired of this apartment, this life, this you." "This me?" His voice cracked. "The me that worked double shifts so you could have the furniture you wanted? The me that took on debt so you wouldn't have to live with roommates anymore? The me that—" "That's exactly what I'm talking about." She spun back to face him, her eyes blazing. "You throw everything you've done in my face like I'm supposed to worship you for it. You bought a couch, Marcus. You bought a refrigerator. You're not a hero. You're just a man doing what men are supposed to do." And what are women supposed to do? The question came out sharper than he intended. "Because you don't clean, you don't cook. You don't contribute to anything except complaints about what we don't have." Her hand connected with his face before he even saw it coming. The slap wasn't hard enough to hurt physically, but the shock of it froze him in place. "Don't you dare," she hissed, her finger pointed at his chest. "Don't you dare act like I'm the problem here." Marcus touched his cheek, more stunned than hurt. In all the months they'd been together, Vanessa had never been physical. This was new territory, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. "I think you should go stay somewhere else tonight," he said quietly. "Maybe we both need some space to think." "Fine." She grabbed her purse and headed toward the bedroom. More than fine. She emerged 5 minutes later with an overnight bag, her face set in hard lines. At the door, she paused, and for a second Marcus thought she might apologize, might acknowledge how far they'd fallen from what they'd been. Instead, she said, "This isn't working, Marcus. You have to know that." Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty apartment. Marcus stood in the kitchen, the onions still on the cutting board, the sauce he'd planned to make suddenly seeming absurd. He looked around at the apartment he'd furnished piece by piece, the life he'd constructed with such care and hope, and felt like he was standing in a museum dedicated to his own stupidity. How had he not seen this coming? How had he convinced himself that sacrifice and provision equaled love? He spent that night on the couch, unable to face their bed alone, scrolling through old photos on his phone. There they were at Stone Mountain, Vanessa laughing as they climbed the trail. There they were at his nephew's graduation party, her arm around his waist. There they were in this very apartment, standing in front of the new TV he'd just brought home, both smiling like they'd won the lottery. When had those smiles become fake? Had they always been? Vanessa didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. She sent a text on Saturday, "Staying with a friend." need time to think. Marcus didn't ask which friend. He was afraid he already knew. He'd seen the signs for weeks now. The way she'd mentioned a new manager at work named Deshawn. How she'd casually brought up his name in conversations, testing Marcus's reaction. The defensive way she'd talked about him when Marcus had asked innocent questions. "He's just a coworker," she'd insisted. "God, Marcus, you're so jealous." But Marcus knew the difference between jealousy and intuition. His gut had been screaming for months that something was wrong, that someone else had entered the picture. He just hadn't wanted to believe it. The weekend passed in a blur of cleaning, scrubbing the apartment top to bottom as if he could erase the dysfunction that had taken root there. He did laundry, vacuumed, organized, trying to create order from the chaos consuming his life. Sunday evening, his phone rang. Vanessa's name lit up the screen. "Hello? Marcus, we need to talk." Her voice sounded different, harder, more certain. "Okay, you want to come by?" "No, I can say this over the phone." A pause. "I'm not coming back." The words should have destroyed him, but instead Marcus felt something unexpected. Relief. Like a weight he'd been carrying for months had suddenly been lifted. "There's someone else," he said. Not a question, a statement. "That's not—" She stopped, sighed. "It doesn't matter. What matters is, this isn't working. We're not working." "You're right," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We're not. I'll come get my stuff next week, when you're at work. Take whatever's yours." He looked around the apartment at the furniture, the appliances, the things he'd bought that she'd demanded. "But Van, everything else, I bought it. I paid for it. It stays." "That's petty, Marcus." "No, it's fair. You're leaving. You don't get to take the life I built with you." He heard her intake of breath, could picture her face reddening with anger. But he didn't care anymore. For the first time in months, Marcus felt something other than exhaustion and inadequacy. He felt clear. "Fine," she snapped. "I don't want your cheap furniture anyway." She hung up before he could respond. Marcus sat on the couch, the expensive couch she'd insisted on, the one that had maxed out his Discover card, and let the reality wash over him. She was gone. Really, truly gone. And she'd left him with nothing but debt, and the realization that he'd been trying to buy love from someone who was never really selling it. His phone buzzed with a text from his older sister, Denise. "You okay?" "You've been quiet." He typed back, "Van and I broke up." 3 dots appeared immediately then. "Coming over. Don't argue." Marcus smiled despite everything. Denise always knew when he needed her. She arrived 40 minutes later with a bag from Popeyes and a bottle of Hennessy, her expression mixing sympathy with that told-you-so look she'd perfected over their 47 years as siblings. "Talk," she commanded, setting the food on the dining table. And Marcus did. He told her everything. The debt, the loneliness, the growing distance, the slap, the phone call. Denise listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking her head or pursing her lips, but letting him get it all out. When he finished, she sat back and fixed him with her steady gaze. "You know what your problem is, Marcus. I'm sure you're about to tell me. You think love is supposed to hurt. You think if you're not sacrificing and suffering, it's not real." She reached across and squeezed his hand. "But that's not love, baby brother. That's martyrdom. And martyrs end up alone on crosses." Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. "I just wanted to make her happy." "I know. But you can't make someone happy if they're determined to be miserable. And you definitely can't make someone love you by buying them things." She stood up and pulled him into a hug. "You're a good man. You deserve someone who sees that without you having to prove it every damn day." That night, after Denise left, Marcus lay in bed and thought about her words. For 2 years, he'd been trying to prove his worth to Vanessa, trying to demonstrate through sacrifice and provision that he deserved her love. But Denise was right. Love wasn't supposed to be a transaction. It wasn't supposed to leave you bankrupt, financially or emotionally. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus made a decision. Whatever came next, he would rebuild. Not for Vanessa, not for anyone else, for himself. October painted Atlanta in shades of amber and rust, the Georgia heat finally breaking into something resembling fall. Marcus had settled into a routine of sorts: work, gym, home, sleep, repeat. The apartment felt bigger now, emptier in ways that had nothing to do with Vanessa taking her clothes and toiletries. It was the absence of tension that made the space feel vast, the relief of not walking on eggshells in his own home. She'd come for her belongings while he was at work, just as she'd promised. He'd returned to find gaps in the closet and bathroom, her side of the medicine cabinet cleared out. She'd taken her clothes, shoes, and personal items, but left everything else exactly as it was. The apartment looked the same, but felt fundamentally different, like a stage set after the actors had gone home. Marcus had started paying down his debt with aggressive focus. He'd picked up extra shifts when available, ate cheap meals, and put every spare dollar toward the credit cards. The Capital One balance had dropped by $800. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. He was at Waffle House on a Saturday morning, his weekly tradition of treating himself to a pecan waffle and coffee, when he ran into Jerome Williams, an old friend from high school who now worked as a mechanic in Decatur. "Marcus Hayes!" Jerome's voice boomed across the restaurant. "Man, how long's it been?" They caught up over breakfast, falling into the easy rhythm of old friendship. Jerome had married his college girlfriend, had 2 kids now, owned a house in Stone Mountain. His life seemed solid, uncomplicated in ways Marcus envied. "So what about you?" Jerome asked, drowning his hash browns in ketchup. "You still with that girl? What was her name? Vanessa?" Marcus hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Nah, we split about a month ago." "Damn, man. Sorry to hear that. What happened?" "The usual. Grew apart. Wanted different things." Marcus didn't mention the debt, the one-sided relationship, the way he'd felt more like a provider than a partner. Some wounds were too fresh to share. "Well, you dodged a bullet then," Jerome said, his tone shifting. "Man, I wasn't going to say nothing while y'all were together, but I heard some things." Marcus's coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. "What kind of things?" Jerome looked uncomfortable, like he was regretting opening this door. "Look, it might be nothing. Just street talk. You know how people run their mouths." Jerome. Ite. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "My cousin Tasha works at that call center where Vanessa works. Midtown, right? She said Vanessa was seeing her manager, dude named Deshawn. Said it had been going on for months, man, like while y'all were still together." Marcus felt his stomach drop, even though the news wasn't really news. He'd suspected as much. But hearing it confirmed, having it spoken aloud in a Waffle House on a Saturday morning, made it real in a way he hadn't prepared for. "You okay?" Jerome asked. "Yeah, like I said, we split. Her business now." Marcus forced himself to take a bite of waffle, though it tasted like cardboard. "There's more, though." Jerome looked genuinely troubled now. "Tasha said this Deshawn guy, he's got a reputation. Been through a string of girlfriends, always ends bad. She said he's got a temper, gets controlling real quick. Couple girls filed complaints with HR, but nothing stuck 'cause he's tight with upper management." A chill ran through Marcus despite the warm restaurant. "Controlling how?" "Like checking their phones, showing up at their place unannounced, blowing up if they talk to other dudes. One girl said he grabbed her arm so hard it left bruises." Jerome shook his head. "Tasha tried to warn Vanessa, but you know how that goes. Girl thinking she's special, thinking he'll be different with her." Marcus sat back, processing this information. Part of him wanted to call Vanessa, to warn her. But what would he say? "Hey, I know you left me for this guy, but he might be dangerous?" She'd think he was jealous, trying to sabotage her new relationship. "Anyway, I thought you should know," Jerome said. "Not to get in her business, just so you know what she walked away to. Sometimes it helps, you know, knowing you're better off." They finished breakfast and exchanged numbers, promising to stay in touch. Marcus drove home with Jerome's words echoing in his head. He thought about Vanessa, about her smile when she looked at her phone, about the way she'd talked about Deshawn like he was everything Marcus wasn't. Successful, confident, exciting. He wondered if she'd already learned the truth about who Deshawn really was, or if she was still in the honeymoon phase, blinded by whatever had made her choose him over Marcus. The answer came 2 weeks later, though not directly. Marcus was at the Kroger on Cleveland Avenue, grabbing groceries after work when he saw her. Vanessa stood in the produce section, examining apples with an intensity that seemed forced. She wore sunglasses despite being indoors, and her makeup was heavier than usual, like she was trying to cover something. Their eyes met across the vegetables. For a moment, neither moved. Then Vanessa quickly looked away and hurried toward the exit, abandoning her cart mid-aisle. But in that brief moment, Marcus had seen what the sunglasses couldn't hide, a yellowish-purple bruise peeking out from under the concealer on her cheekbone. His first instinct was to follow her, to ask if she was okay, to offer help, but his feet stayed planted, because he knew she wouldn't accept it. She'd chosen Deshawn. She'd chosen to leave Marcus and the life he'd built. She'd made her decision, and now she was living with the consequences. Still, the image haunted him. He lay awake that night thinking about it, about the woman he'd loved showing up with bruises she was trying to hide. Part of him felt vindicated. See, he wanted to shout, "See what you chose over me." But a larger part just felt sad. Sad for her. Sad for them both. Sad for the way people sometimes choose the excitement of chaos over the peace of stability. November brought rain and dropping temperatures. Marcus's focus on debt repayment was paying off. The Capital One card was down to $1,200. The Discover card had dropped below $3,000. He'd even started rebuilding his emergency fund, depositing $50 every paycheck into savings. His sister Denise had introduced him to a financial counselor at her church, a woman named Mrs. Patterson who helped people restructure their debt for free. She'd shown Marcus how to prioritize payments, negotiate interest rates, and create a realistic timeline for becoming debt-free. "You'll be clear in about 14 months if you stick to this plan," Mrs. Patterson had said, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed his paperwork. "That's assuming no new debt, and you keep your income steady." 14 months felt like forever, and no time at all. Marcus committed to the plan with the same dedication he'd once brought to pleasing Vanessa, except this time he was investing in himself. The rumors about Vanessa and Deshawn continued to filter through Atlanta's interconnected social networks. Jerome's cousin Tasha reported that Vanessa had stopped coming to work happy hour, that she'd lost weight, looked tired, that Deshawn would show up at the call center to take her to lunch, but it felt more like surveillance than romance. Marcus tried not to care, tried to focus on his own healing, his own rebuilding. He'd started seeing a therapist, a decision Denise had strongly encouraged, and was beginning to understand the patterns that had led him to Vanessa in the first place. "You're a provider," Dr. Morrison had explained in one of their sessions. "That's not inherently bad, but you've confused providing with being valued. You think if you give enough, sacrifice enough, people will love you. But love doesn't work like that." "Then how does it work?" Marcus had asked. "Real love is mutual. It's partnership. It's two people building together, not one person carrying the other while pretending the weight doesn't hurt." The words had hit home. Marcus realized he'd been so focused on being different from his father, who'd abandoned their family when Marcus was 12, that he'd swung too far in the opposite direction. He'd become the man who gave everything and asked for nothing, who martyred himself on the altar of being needed. But being needed wasn't the same as being loved. December arrived with unseasonable warmth, Atlanta's weather refusing to commit to winter. Marcus had plans to spend Christmas with Denise and her family, was actually looking forward to the holidays for the first time in years. Then his phone rang at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. Marcus stared at it for 3 rings, debating whether to answer. Finally, curiosity won. "Hello?" "Marcus." Her voice was small, broken. "Marcus, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He could hear her crying, could hear the desperation bleeding through the phone. "Van, it's late. What's wrong?" "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake." She was sobbing now, words tumbling out between gasps. "You were right, about everything. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Are you hurt? Are you safe? Can I come over? Please, I need to see you. I need to explain." Every instinct screamed at Marcus to say no, to protect the progress he'd made, the peace he'd found. But the sound of her crying pulled at something deep inside him, some old instinct to rescue, to fix, to save. "Van, I don't think that's a good idea." "Please, Marcus, please. I have nowhere else to go. He took my keys. Her voice broke completely. Please. Marcus closed his eyes, warring with himself. Where are you? At the Texaco on Metropolitan. I walked here. Stay there. I'm coming. He hung up and immediately regretted it. But he grabbed his keys anyway, telling himself he was just making sure she was safe, nothing more. The Texaco station was harsh with fluorescent light when Marcus pulled up. Vanessa sat on the curb near the air pump, her arms wrapped around herself despite the mild temperature. As Marcus got closer, he could see her face fully for the first time in weeks. The bruise on her cheek had healed, but there was a newer one on her jaw. Her lip was split. Her left eye was swollen. She looked up as he approached, and the shame in her expression broke his heart despite everything. "Oh, Van," he breathed. "I know," she whispered. "I know what you're thinking. You were right. I should have listened. I should have... Let's not do this here. Get in the car." She stood slowly, like everything hurt. Marcus noticed her favoring her right side, the way she moved like someone trying not to aggravate injuries. Rage flooded through him, not at Vanessa, but at Deshawn, at the violence written across her skin. They drove back to the apartment in silence. Marcus helped her up the stairs, felt her lean on him the way she used to when they were happy. But this was different. This wasn't affection. This was necessity. Inside, he sat her on the couch, the same couch he'd gone into debt to buy for her, and got ice from the freezer. She held it against her eye while tears rolled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry, Marcus." And Marcus, sitting across from her in the chair she'd once complained wasn't comfortable enough, looked at the woman he'd loved and felt something shift inside him. Something that had been tethered finally breaking free. Because in that moment, Marcus Hayes understood a truth that would change everything. He couldn't save her. He could only save himself. Vanessa slept on the couch that night while Marcus lay awake in his bedroom, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with ghosts. The old Marcus, the one who'd sacrificed everything, who'd bankrupted himself trying to build a life she didn't want, that Marcus would have seen this as a second chance, a redemption arc. She'd come back. She'd realized her mistake. Surely that meant something. But the new Marcus, the one who'd spent 3 months in therapy learning to value himself, knew better. When morning light filtered through the blinds, Marcus found Vanessa exactly where he'd left her, curled up on the sectional with the throw blanket he'd gotten from Target. She stirred as he moved through the living room, her eyes opening slowly, confusion crossing her face before memory settled in. "Hey," she said softly. "Morning. You want some coffee?" "Yeah, thanks." Marcus made coffee in the kitchen, his movements automatic. He'd done this 1,000 times when they were together, waking up first, starting the coffee, beginning his day while she slept in. The familiarity of it felt like being haunted by his own past. He brought her a mug, black, 2 sugars, the way she liked it, and sat in the armchair across from her. "We need to talk," he said. Vanessa nodded, wrapping her hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. In the morning light, her injuries looked worse. The bruise on her jaw had darkened overnight to a deep purple. Her split lip had scabbed over. She looked small, fragile, nothing like the confident woman who'd walked out of his life 2 months ago. "I know what you're gonna say," she started. "And you're right. About all of it. I was wrong to leave the way I did. I was wrong about Deshawn. I was wrong about you." She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "But I'm here now. And I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for another chance. To do it right this time." Marcus took a slow sip of his coffee, letting her words settle in the space between them. 6 months ago, hell, even 3 months ago, those words would have been everything he wanted to hear. But now they just sounded like desperation. "What happened, Van? Last night, I mean." She looked down at her mug. "We got in a fight. About something stupid. I don't even remember what. He'd been drinking. He gets different when he drinks." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "He pushed me into the wall. Then he hit me. When I tried to leave, he took my keys, my phone, said I wasn't going anywhere. But he passed out on the couch, so I ran. This wasn't the first time. Not a question. Marcus already knew. No." Tears started falling again. It got bad pretty quick after I moved in with him. At first, it was just yelling, controlling stuff like checking my phone and telling me what to wear. Then he pushed me. Then he grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. Last night was the first time he actually hit me in the face. Marcus felt sick. You need to file a police report. I can't. He knows people. And he said if I ever tried to get him in trouble, he'd make sure I regretted it. She set down the coffee mug and leaned forward. That's why I need to be here, Marcus, with you. Where it's safe, where I'm protected. And there it was, the real reason for her return. Not love, not regret, not even genuine remorse. Safety. Protection. The same thing she'd always wanted from Marcus. Provision without partnership. Van, Marcus said carefully, you can't stay here. Her head snapped up, shock written across her features. What? I said you can't stay here. This isn't your home anymore. You made that clear when you left. But I explained, Deshaun is dangerous. I have nowhere else to go. You have family. You have friends. You have options that don't involve coming back to a relationship you didn't want in the first place. I do want it. Her voice rose, desperate. I made a mistake, Marcus. People make mistakes. You're supposed to forgive mistakes. Marcus set down his own mug and leaned back, studying her. I do forgive you, Van. I really do. I forgive you for leaving. I forgive you for the way you treated me when we were together. I forgive you for taking me for granted. He paused, making sure she was really listening. But forgiving you doesn't mean letting you back into my life. You don't mean that. You're just hurt. You're trying to punish me. I'm not trying to punish you. I'm trying to protect myself. Marcus stood up, needing the physical distance. You know what I learned these last few months? I learned that I spent 2 years of my life trying to be enough for someone who was never going to be satisfied. I worked myself half to death, went into debt, sacrificed everything I had, and it still wasn't enough. Because the problem wasn't that I wasn't giving enough. The problem was you were never really invested in us. That's not true. It is true, Van. You never cleaned, never cooked, never helped with bills, never contributed to building this life beyond complaining about what we didn't have. You took and took and took, and the second someone else offered you something that looked shinier, you left. He ran his hand over his face, exhausted by the truth of it. And now that the shiny thing turned out to be fool's gold, you want to come back to what you know is real. But I'm not a safety net. I'm not a backup plan. I'm a human being who deserves to be someone's first choice, not their last resort. Vanessa stood up, anger flashing across her face. So what, you're just going to throw me out? After everything we had? After all the time we spent together? What we had was one-sided, and the time we spent together was me auditioning for a role you'd already decided I wasn't right for. Marcus moved toward the door, opening it. You need to leave, Vanessa. You can call a friend, call your sister, call a domestic violence hotline. I'll give you the number for a shelter if you need it, but you can't stay here. I can't believe you're doing this. She grabbed her shoes, shoving her feet into them with shaking hands. After I came to you, after I was honest with you, you're really just going to turn me away? Yes, Marcus said simply. I am. She stood at the open door, looking back at him with a mixture of disbelief and fury. You're going to regret this. When you're alone and miserable, you're going to remember that I came back and you turned me away. Marcus felt something settle in his chest, solid and unmovable as bedrock. No, Van, I'm not. Because I'd rather be alone than be with someone who only wants me when they can't have anything better. She left without another word, her footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Marcus closed the door and leaned against it, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. He'd drawn a line and held it, even when every old instinct had screamed at him to rescue, to save, to sacrifice himself one more time. His phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. You're making a huge mistake. Marcus deleted it without responding. Over the next few days, she tried calling. She sent texts ranging from apologetic to angry to pleading. She even showed up at his apartment one evening, but Marcus didn't answer the door. He watched through the peephole as she knocked, waited, knocked again, then finally left. He blocked her number, blocked her on social media, cut off every avenue she might use to pull him back into her orbit. Denise called it tough love. Dr. Morrison called it healthy boundaries. Marcus just called it survival. December rolled into the new year. Marcus spent Christmas with Denise's family, played with his nephew and niece, ate too much sweet potato pie, and felt genuinely happy for the first time in longer than he could remember. He'd paid off the Capital One card completely. The Discover card was down to $1,800. The personal loan was on track to be finished by June. He'd rebuilt his emergency fund to $1,200 and had started contributing to his 401k again. The apartment felt like his now, truly his, in a way it never had when Vanessa lived there. He'd rearranged the furniture, hung some pictures his nephew had drawn, bought himself a new coffee maker that made exactly one perfect cup at a time. Small things. Simple things. But they were his choices, his life, shaped by his preferences instead of someone else's demands. It was mid-January when Jerome called. "Man, you sitting down?" Jerome's voice carried that tone that meant bad news was coming. "Should I be?" "Vanessa's in the hospital. Beat up pretty bad. Deshawn's in jail." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "How bad?" "Tasha said she's got broken ribs, concussion, her arm's fractured. He went at her pretty hard." Jerome paused. "Word is she tried to leave him again and he lost it. Neighbor heard her screaming and called the cops. Good thing they got there when they did." Marcus sat down on his couch, processing this. He felt horror at what she'd endured, but also something else, a grim validation that his instincts had been right. If he'd taken her back, he would have become part of her pattern. An enabler. A safety net that prevented her from hitting rock bottom and actually changing her life. "She asking for you?" Jerome asked. "I don't know. I blocked her number." "Good. Keep it that way. Some people, they gotta learn their lessons the hard way. You can't save everybody, especially people who don't want to save themselves." After they hung up, Marcus sat in his quiet apartment and thought about the man he used to be. The one who would have dropped everything and run to the hospital. The one who would have blamed himself for not being there to protect her. But that Marcus had been drowning, sacrificing himself to keep someone else afloat who had chosen to jump in deeper waters. This Marcus, the one who'd learned to value himself, who'd rebuilt his life and his self-worth brick by brick, knew a hard truth. You can't love someone into making better choices. You can only make better choices for yourself. He said a quiet prayer for Vanessa's recovery. Hoped she'd find the strength to truly leave Deshawn. Hoped she'd get the help she needed to break her pattern of choosing chaos over peace. But he didn't call. Didn't visit. Didn't reopen a door he'd worked so hard to close. Because Marcus Hayes had finally learned that love without reciprocity isn't love at all. It's just slow suicide dressed up in noble sacrifice. And he'd already died that death once. He wasn't going to do it again. Spring came early to Georgia in 2019, the city erupting in dogwood blossoms and azaleas by mid-March. Marcus stood on the small balcony of his apartment, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. The sun caught on car windshields and street signs, painting everything in shades of gold. He'd just gotten a promotion at work, supervisor position that came with a 20% raise and better hours. No more constant overtime, no more destroying his body for extra dollars. Just honest work, fair pay, and weekends that belonged to him. The apartment looked different now. He'd painted the living room a warm gray, hung art he'd picked up from a street fair in Little 5 Points, invested in some plants that somehow hadn't died under his care. The sectional was still there. He'd considered selling it, but that felt like giving Vanessa power she didn't deserve. Instead, he'd reclaimed it, made it his, covered it with throw pillows his nephew had helped him pick out at Target. This was his space now. Not a monument to a failed relationship, but a foundation for whatever came next. It had been 14 months since Vanessa left. 8 months since she'd shown up bruised and desperate. 6 months since he'd heard anything about her at all. Marcus had learned through Jerome's network that she'd eventually left Deshawn for good after the hospitalization. Moved back in with her mother in Lithonia. Started therapy. Got a restraining order. Deshawn had done 6 months for assault, was out now but apparently keeping his distance. Marcus felt relief at that news, genuine relief that she'd escaped. But he felt it from a distance, the way you feel relief when you hear about a stranger surviving a car accident. He wished her well, hoped she found peace, but she was no longer his concern. Dr. Morrison had helped him understand the difference between caring about someone and being responsible for them. Marcus could care about Vanessa's well-being without sacrificing his own, could hope she found happiness without needing to be the one to provide it. The debt was gone. All of it. He'd made the final payment on the Discover card in February, celebrated by taking Denise out to dinner at her favorite seafood spot in Buckhead. His credit score had climbed back into the 700s. He'd even started saving for a down payment on a house, something that had seemed impossible a year ago. But the real wealth wasn't in his bank account. It was in the lessons he'd learned, the person he'd become through the painful process of choosing himself. He'd learned that sacrifice without reciprocity was martyrdom, not love. That providing for someone and being valued by them were different things, that you couldn't build a partnership alone, no matter how hard you worked. He'd learned that some people would always choose chaos because peace felt too unfamiliar, too quiet, too much like work. That you could love someone deeply and still need to walk away. That walking away wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Most importantly, he'd learned his own worth. That he deserved partnership, not parasitism. That he deserved someone who contributed, not just consumed. That he deserved to be chosen first, not settled for when better options failed. His phone buzzed. A text from a woman named Angela he'd met at his nephew's basketball game 3 weeks ago. They'd been on 2 dates, just coffee and conversation, nothing serious, but she made him laugh and she'd insisted on splitting the check both times, which had felt revolutionary. "Still on for the High Museum Sunday?" her text read. Marcus smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. Looking forward to it." He wasn't rushing into anything, wasn't trying to fill a void or prove he was over Vanessa. He was just living, meeting people, seeing where things went, moving at a pace that felt healthy instead of desperate. Later that afternoon, Marcus was cleaning the apartment, a habit he'd maintained even though it was now just him, when his phone rang from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello?" "Marcus." The voice was hesitant, feminine, familiar. His chest tightened. "Vanessa. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, and I wouldn't blame you if you hung up right now." A pause. "But I needed to call. I've been working on myself, in therapy, and my counselor said I needed to make amends with people I'd hurt. You were at the top of that list." Marcus sat down on the couch, processing. "Okay. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Really, genuinely sorry. Not because I want something from you or need you to take me back or anything like that, just sorry." Her voice cracked slightly. "I treated you terribly. I took everything you gave and acted like it was owed to me. I complained about what we didn't have instead of appreciating what we did. I cheated on you, emotionally and physically. I disrespected you. And then, when my life fell apart, I tried to use you as a safety net. You deserved so much better than what I gave you, Marcus." He listened, feeling the words wash over him without the sting he would have expected. They were true. All of it. But the truth didn't hurt anymore. "I'm glad you're doing better," Marcus said finally. "I really am. I heard you got a promotion. Jerome's cousin Tasha mentioned it. That's great, Marcus. You always worked so hard." "Yeah, it's good. Better hours, better pay. I'm in a good place." "Good. You deserve that." Another pause. "I won't take up more of your time. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I didn't then. That you were trying to build something real, and I was too immature to see its value. I hope someday you find someone who appreciates you the way you deserve to be appreciated." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, because he'd already forgiven her months ago. This was something else. Closure. The final piece clicking into place. "I appreciate you saying that, Van. It means something. And I hope you keep doing the work. Keep building a better life for yourself." "I'm trying. One day at a time, right?" "Yeah, one day at a time." They said goodbye, and Marcus set his phone down, feeling lighter somehow, like a ghost had finally been laid to rest. That evening, he met Denise for dinner at their favorite Caribbean spot in Stone Mountain. Over jerk chicken and plantains, he told her about the call. "How'd it make you feel?" Denise asked, studying him with that big sister intensity. "Honestly? Grateful. For the apology? For the whole thing? For the way it ended? For learning the lessons when I did instead of 20 years from now? Marcus took a sip of his ginger beer. If she'd never left, if things had just stayed mediocre and one-sided, I might still be there, still sacrificing myself, still thinking that was what love looked like. Denise reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You know what I'm proud of? Not that you survived it, that you learned from it. Some people go through hell and come out the same person. You went through hell and came out better. Marcus thought about that as he drove home later, the Atlanta skyline glittering against the darkening sky. Denise was right. He wasn't the same man who'd emptied his bank account trying to buy love. Wasn't the same man who'd confused provision with partnership. He was someone who knew his worth now, who understood that real love was mutual, that healthy relationships required two people building together, that sacrifice without reciprocity wasn't noble, it was slow suicide. As Marcus climbed the stairs to his apartment, he thought about Angela and their upcoming museum date, thought about the house he was saving for, thought about the life stretching ahead of him, full of possibility now that he'd learned to value himself. He unlocked his door and stepped into his space, his home, his sanctuary, his foundation. And for the first time in years, Marcus Hayes felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. Not the absence of problems, not the numbness of denial, but the deep, settled peace of a man who knew who he was and what he deserved. He'd sacrificed everything for someone who'd chosen a man who hurt her. He'd given his all to someone who'd valued him at nothing. But he'd survived. More than that, he'd learned. He'd grown. He'd become a man who would never again mistake martyrdom for love. The old Marcus had died in that relationship. The new Marcus had risen from the ashes stronger, wiser, and finally free. And that, he realized, was worth more than all the furniture, all the debt, all the pain combined. Because Marcus Hayes had finally learned the most important lesson of all. The person most worth sacrificing for was yourself.